This is officially Coffee Conversations, an interactive discussion series that's hosted by the Academy of Communication and Healthcare. I'm Laura Cooley, the Senior Director of Education and Outreach, and I'll be your host today. And if you're new to our community, the Academy of Communication and Healthcare is a nonprofit academic community to support education and research on communication and relationships in healthcare. And today we are featuring a guest, Krista Hirschmann, around the topic of leading with relationship-centered communication. We will meet Krista in just a moment. I'd like to meet you, so to speak. So if you would, in the chat box, for those of you who have access to type, I would love for you to just type your current location if you're willing to share, and your role. So however you want to identify yourself, and that will give us a sense of who's in the room. I'm going to pause while you type. I always love seeing the wide range of people who are joining us from locations and backgrounds. So as you continue to introduce your location and your role, I just want to ground you for our session. This is not like a webinar. This is really more like a conversation, and we invite you to engage. So feel free to use the chat box throughout our session. And our real aim is to connect you with colleagues. So part one is going to be an interview conversation with our featured guest of the day. And we're looking for featured guests, by the way. So we'd love for you to apply if you're interested. And we will record this first part of our interview, and it'll be housed in our ACH member site, ACH Connect, so you can look at it later. We encourage you to keep your audio on mute during this first part, just to minimize distractions, and your video is definitely optional. Part two is when we transition to breakout groups, and we hope that you can stay for the full hour. The breakout groups are really fun, informal discussions. We'll give you a few prompts, but you'll go to a small group, meet some colleagues, and share ideas related to today's featured topic. The second part is not recorded, so we want you to be comfortable and in conversation with each other for that second part. So without further ado, please continue to type your role and your location as if you haven't done so yet. And I would like to spotlight our featured guest, Krista Hirschmann. Krista, welcome. Since this is Coffee Conversations, I'd love to just let you introduce yourself. We're having a dialogue here, but to do so, because it's Coffee Conversations, tell us your name, something about your work. But what's your morning beverage of choice? And mine is almost always coffee. However, today I'm focusing on mint tea. I'm not feeling great.
Sorry to hear that, Laura. So good morning, everyone. My name is Krista Hirschmann. I am physically located in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And my role is multifaceted. I'm a faculty member with the ACH, do a lot of trainings with them, as well as run my own consulting business, and happy to be here today. So Laura, today I have this. I'm going to say something about the mug first. This was given to me by my daughter, and she calls it my Downton Abbey mug. So I'm in my Downton Abbey cup, and in my Downton Abbey cup is my turmeric and ginger tea. That's my beverage of choice in the morning, both sweet and spicy. So thanks for having me here.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to hear you share some thoughts about leading with relationship-centered communication. And I want to acknowledge that Krista is one of our featured workshop faculty at the Enrich course that we have in Austin, Texas in June. So this is going to be a little bit of a sneak peek. So I'm excited to hear what your workshop is going to focus on at Enrich. And you can see a link to that course in the chat box. Kelsey will be putting that back in there. So let's start. When we talk about leading with relationship-centered communication, one of our goals today is to talk about our relational systems model. And I'm just wondering, how do you define that? Like, what are what is a relational systems model, and what are the advantages of thinking systematically, Krista?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that, Laura. Yeah, and to just right size this, so this is a 20-minute version of a 4-hour workshop that could be a 1-day course. So that's what we're going for here. So a couple quick definitions that I think might be helpful. So first of all, we don't do this often, but communication, what do we mean by communication? We're trying to co-create shared meaning between people. So that when we talk about communication, that's what we're going for. Lots of different ways for that to occur. When we talk about relationship-centered communication, we're talking about, which is in the title of today's talk, we're talking about those specific skills that can help facilitate and strengthen relationships. And so they're basic interpersonal skills that ACH has taken and really developed in terms of the clinical context, both for patient care and for administrative work. And it's the administrative end of things that we're talking about today. And then we're going to be talking about systems briefly. And so what do we mean by a system? Well, a system is a bunch of any interrelated parts, and it's that interrelationship that is really the key defining characteristic of a system. And ideally they have some sort of goal or purpose. So there's lots of different systems out there. There's our body system, there's the solar system, our computer system, cell phones, and so forth. But we are talking about relational systems. So those parts are not computer parts, they are people. And so we're thinking about how to bring them into connection and strengthen their relationships.
So I love the way you're describing that, because I think sometimes I forget to think about how everyone on a team or in an organization is interconnected. And you've always helped me think about that a little bit. And we talk about relationship-centered communication, and sometimes that seems like the dyadic relationship. And what you're talking about is really that is more systemic. And when you're thinking about leading towards a relationship-centered culture, I often think about the leader. What are the responsibilities of the leader to help make this relational system work?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because I think so often we have been programmed from all different angles to think about leadership in a certain way. A leader, somebody who's not afraid to stand in front of the room and set a vision and be charismatic, and maybe, strolls through the office and knows everybody's, pets' names and has connections with everybody. And that is important. And those characteristics, I'm not discouraging them in any way. But you also want a leader who can think systemically, who is able to get up on the balcony to look at the whole picture, and not just look at the whole picture, but to recognize how the parts are connected and how they're not connected. And by parts, I mean people. So what people are in connection, who needs to be talking to each other, and not just identifying that, but really being able to get involved in helping to facilitate that. So leadership's responsibilities are not just to walk around and help facilitate problem solving, which is what we all love to do in healthcare, right? We want to fix the problem and make things better. But sometimes we really need to, I don't want to say grease the wheels a little bit and get involved in helping to facilitate others who can come in connection and do the work together and step back as the leader.
Yeah, when I hear you say that, I'm nodding yeah, that sounds great. I want to be that kind of leader. And for me, I've always found it a little challenging to bring that into practical reality. What are some of the tools, Krista, that can enable a leader to work in those responsibilities?
Yeah, another good question, and this is going to be the heart of the workshop at Enrich, is really walking through some of these tools and getting a little tasting of them. So rather than just being responsible for fixing the problems and fixing the system as fires occur, and thinking about these sort of relational facilitation tools as a leader, one place to start is with just the basic principle of psychological safety. There's two authors that I particularly gravitate to. That's Amy Edmondson, who's with the Harvard Business School, as well as Tim Clark. They both have books out there, very easy reads, very applicable books. But thinking about how you as a leader can role model and help how you can help role model or develop that culture of psychological safety, so people feel comfortable speaking up, feeling included and heard, and so forth. So psychological safety would be one.
Well, so I think Kelsey's going to help us out and put these in the chat box. For those of you who are eagerly taking notes, I also want to forecast that we're going to send some follow-up resources because Krista just named several, like the work of Amy Evanson on psychological safety. We'll send you some resources after this too, which Krista has worked hard to compile, preparing for her Enrich workshop and other workshops. So Krista, I love it when I have a list of tools to think about. What's the next? I know psychological safety is a whole topic in and of itself.
Yeah, so psychological safety, and if you just Google any of these terms, you're going to get books and videos and lots of other resources in addition to the ones that we'll send you. So the second thing that we encourage is an appreciative inquiry stance. So if you are familiar at all with appreciative inquiry, you can use it in very specific one-on-one kinds of ways. You can use it as sort of a big organizational tool to investigate with curiosity about the things that are going well. But it's really, the inquiry part is about asking questions. We grow towards the questions that we ask. So it's about asking strength-based questions and taking that magnifying lens and really putting it over the things that are going well for you and your team rather than constantly focusing on only the problems. So that would be another one.
Yeah. Well, I feel like compelled, Krista, to interrupt you every time you say a new one. But the thing I've always loved about appreciative inquiry when it comes to relationship-centered work is just the idea that we are often trying to fix and correct things, but that we can lead with RCC by focusing on what's working well. And I feel like that's one of the strengths I really hear in the approach that you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. So the third thing that we're going to be talking about at Enrich is relational coordination. We don't talk about this a lot. Some of you might already be familiar with it. It is a framework for helping teams to discuss their work. So you're not just connecting as human beings and getting to know each other on a personal level, but there's actually buckets of work that need to be done. And so this helps you to focus on who needs to have what conversations in order to accomplish the work at hand. And so that would be another useful tool to at least be familiar with if you don't use it, in its entirety.
So it's a model that sort of connects well with relationship-centered communication, and it's focused on systems. So yes. That sounds really, really helpful. Okay, what's next?
Okay, next on the list we have good old-fashioned relationship-centered communication skills. So this is what many of you might already be familiar with. This is the heart and soul of ACH and what we tend to teach in most of our trainings. But what we do is we want to take those skills and not just use them with our patients, but also be able to translate them into those conversations with our colleagues and with our teams as well. And so getting familiar and comfortable with those skills, not just in the clinical context, but in the administrative work as well, is really, really important. And I think sometimes people are surprised to see how easily they translate to other situations and to other contexts.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you put this on the list because one of the things that I support with the ACH community is our Train the Trainer program. And we're often helping institutions think about how to teach relationship-centered communication to clinicians and other staff in allied health. And I usually say, like, it starts with the leaders. Your leaders need to take this first and foremost, and that is what really starts to shift the culture. So I'm glad this is an integral part. And I think you have one more thing on the list, Krista.
I do. I have one more thing, and this is sort of a catch-all, and I don't think this is going to come as any surprise, but that is just taking the opportunity to continue to develop your own sense of personal awareness, what you are bringing to the table as a leader, what's going on in your personal life and how it might be affecting you. What our go-to starting place tool is the ladder of inference. I think that's a really useful an important tool for helping us to step back and dissect the stories that we are telling ourselves and which we are living by and which we are taking action according to these stories that we're telling ourselves. So that's helpful, but there are so many other resources out there, strength finders, leadership inventories of different types, unconscious bias surveys. So anything or all that helps that you bring more insight to who you are as a person at this time is super important for leadership, because it is that internal landscape, whether you name it or not, that's going to be influencing the rest of the people that you are connecting with in your work.
Yeah, I want to pause for a moment because I'm imagining that our group here has a lot of wisdom around this topic already, and maybe a lot of curiosity. So I'm actually going to invite any question or reflection that you might want to share in the chat box. We may not get to it, but we'd love to pause and give you chat box voice. In the next 10 minutes, we're going to transition to breakout groups, and we'll share a few prompts to help you. So we hope you can stay in that breakout group, unmute yourself, turn on your camera if it's possible, and really engage in some conversation. So Krista, I'm just going to pause for a moment and see what might come in through the chat box in terms of question or reflection based on what you've said so far. And then I know I have another question or two for you if we find time. So just bring a moment of pause.
Yeah. I think most of you can sense that we are just skimming the surface here and throwing out some seeds of ideas. So I'd love to know where you'd like to take the conversation.
So Elizabeth is writing with a question: how do you advocate for leaders to emerge from non-position places in the organization to make relational change? I'm sort of making my own interpretation of that question, Krista. I wonder what you're thinking, and I'll pause before we go on.
Yeah, I mean, it is so hard to try and lead from a informal leadership role, lead from behind, if you will. It's not easy. And so if you are in the leadership position, or if you're not, and you're interested in developing the culture around this work, the best advice I can give is just connect to one person at a time. Find one ally, then find another ally, and find another ally, and just keep growing that. Don't try to start big. Don't try to start with this big overhaul, this big project. Just grow the system organically and have people, who really want to be a part of the conversation, become included.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting some feedback that sounds helpful, Krista. And I love another prompt that we have for Tara. Can you describe a real life example of someone or some institution where this has been exemplified? And if you have anything specific, that would really help bring this to life.
Okay, well, I don't want to call out on anybody in our audience, but I know there are some people out there. So hi, Tara, it's good to see you. I know you. So I think given how healthcare is, and given how most organizations are expanding at an exponential rate, and the systems are growing so incredibly complex, I would say that it's probably unrealistic to have one unified culture that's all relationship centered. I mean, I just want to be realistic about it. So I think if you can have sort of influence over a subculture or a team or a group of people within those larger organizations, that can be really important. I know when I was housed in a hospital, we did things like started Schwartz rounds, and we had a community of people around that. I was working with palliative medicine, and so we built a culture, relationship center culture around that. So, and then I know there's people on here that have been, using the Train the Trainer program through ACH and trying to grow the community by building a common language. So, there's no one right way for this to happen. But I think going back to that one person at a time kind of conversation is when I've seen it be successful. It takes longer that way, but it also is more sustainable.
Yeah, Krista, one of the things I was thinking about with Tara's question is the third element you listed about relational coordination. And there's quite a bit of research published about how using that relational coordination tool can be one of the elements to make things tangible. Any like thoughts about using the tools or examples you've seen?
Yeah, so Are you asking specifically about relational coordination?
Well,
Yeah.
that's an example of something more concrete, I think.
So so that's thanks for helping me land that. So that is something that I've used. We used it in a primary care setting where we had practice coaches going in, helping to help primary care practices both improve their efficiency as well as strengthen their relationships. And so for a tool like that, as a facilitator, I would go in, and I didn't really have the hard data to help name what was happening. So I'd be like, well, I went in and they weren't smiling, and then we left a couple months later and they were. So things must have been improved. But having a tool like that really helps pinpoint who's thinking what and who needs to be in connection in what way. So there's so many different roles within. And there's power dynamics too, so it helps you to sort of overcome, navigate carefully, and facilitate around the power dynamics that might be in a particular team or particular practice. They're always embedded in healthcare everywhere that we go. And we had a lot of success in that case, and we were able to track that as their relationships strengthened by having certain types of conversation about certain types of work, that there was improved outcomes as well within the practice. So there was a lot that went into that. The tool just helped us measure it, but it also gave us a lot of guidance. And then things like the RCC skills were the help to inform how we had those conversations, right, in really specific and safe ways.
Yeah, and as we move towards our breakout rooms, we're going to give you some prompts that you can borrow from. But we're also, oh, I'm afraid was I muted for all that?
Just for a second.
Okay. So I think tangible tools are one of my takeaways from this conversation, and I hope that as we move to our breakout groups, the conversations can continue. And I also hope that we'll get to meet some of you in person at our Enrich course, which Kelsey has been putting in the chat box, and we'll do so again. Krista, thank you. I wonder if there's one brief wrap-up thought you'd like to offer as we prepare to go to breakout rooms.
I threw a lot at you, so I think the thought I would say is don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel you have to do all 5 of these things and dive in. I mean, this is sort of a career of experience that I'm distilling down. And so just pick one, one thing that sort of speaks to you that makes you feel alive, and start there and go with your instincts.
Yeah, thank you. Baby steps in many of our change efforts. And
always.
Kelsey is going to help us by putting some prompts in the chat box. And I'll just briefly name that these are informal discussions. We hope somebody might be willing to help keep the group on track as an informal facilitator. The prompts are there as suggestions. You may have other things that you're entering with that you want to be sure and talk about. So very briefly, we encourage you to introduce yourselves, your name, your role, your location. Maybe you want to share a reflection or a question that emerged. And then Krista provided a couple of prompts. What did the conversation make you think about? What resources or activities have you supported as a leader with developing RCC skills? So we hope you can stay for these next 30 minutes or so, and then we'll come back to the main group for a little brief wrap up. So without further ado, Kelsey will invite you to a breakout room, and we'll see you back here in about 30 minutes.